relatively safe to say that we'll have quite a bit of material for Rogue One before we get to October. And as a matter of fact, more than likely, I'm going to end up eating most of my words that I'm talking about in terms of a lack of promotion for Rogue One here in probably about a month. Because I remember back when we were complaining that we had to wait as long as we did to get the Force Awakens full trailer, and I think we can all remember just how inundated we got once we got closer to the movie, and we're like, okay, stop, we got enough trailers already, we're good to go. I'm going to venture a guess that we're going to get even more for Rogue One because they're going to have to go and sell it even harder.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Now, one thing that we do have a lot of is a lot of stuff for Episode 8, oddly enough. I'm going to work in reverse order with the most recent information and then back up to what we've seen from the pictures taken from the Dubrovnik set. And this is going to get into the meat of what I wanted to talk about on today's podcast. But the most recent leak has been a description of an Episode 8 sequence. So if you don't want any spoilers for Episode 8, then I would skip ahead like 2 minutes because I'm going to give you some Episode 8 spoilers. Here we go. Latino Review has heard some interesting information about Laura Dern's character in Episode 8. It appears that she is in charge of some kind of larger ship and has rank on Poe Dameron. Now, first off, I like to hear that because at least it indicates that she has perhaps a larger role than what she could potentially have. And what I mean by that is getting back to the casting, when we find out about casting for these movies, and we knew that Max von Sydow was going to be in The Force Awakens, there was an assumption by almost everybody that he was going to be a major character. He was a major character, he just wasn't in the movie for very long. I like Laura Dern a lot, and so I'm kind of hoping she has a larger role. This is indication that perhaps she has a larger role than just one portion of the movie and then gets knocked off like Max von Sydow did. So, Laura Dern's character in charge of a larger ship and has rank on Poe Dameron. However, Poe is forced to take matters into his own hands, and here's the quote. In one of the scenes shot in this stage, a ragtag group of resistance fighters have seen some battle. Cut and bruised, they and Poe Dameron are on this ship with Laura Dern, playing some sort of captain or officer. She tells the resistance fighters that they are the last of the rebellion/resistance. I'm unclear on the exact phrasing of the line, so no capitalizing the resistance. And that Princess Leia has been gravely injured and is receiving some medical attention. Poe then points his blaster at Dern, and they remove the crew techs from their stations. It almost makes me wonder if there are some problems with the faltering resistance and the remnants of the Republic. So the takeaway would be, and this all comes from MakingStarWars.net, Dern's character believes that they're the last of the resistance force. It sounds like her take is wrong, and Poe is forced to take matters into his own hands. Leia is badly injured, but with a doctor. There have been a lot of rumors about Dern's character, but this is the first one that doesn't sound like wish casting, as in, I wish she was Rey's mom or Luke's wife, and so on. The bigger takeaway from me goes into what I wanted to talk about. Rian Johnson is a fan of the prequel movies. He was quoted in 2014 when it was announced that he was going to be directing episode 8 and writing and directing episode 8 and 9, that he was a big prequel fan. And then he thought those movies were beautiful. And that caused a lot of concern for a lot of fans, those that had problems with the prequels. But again, the look of the prequels wasn't really the issue. I think most people will agree with that. The story was good. The issue was that George didn't direct the actors well enough. The stories were great in all three of the movies. I had no problem with the direction. Well, again, I like the prequels, but arguing for a moment of an anti-prequel person, most people that I've heard when they criticize the prequels, they criticize them from a standpoint of, hey, these movies the acting was really, really horrible and didn't feel like Star Wars. It wasn't ever really the look about him. Now, granted, George took a lot of liberties, or risks, I should say, with pushing the limits of the technology at the time. There are some scenes in Revenge of the Sith, in terms of too much green screen background, that are just atrocious, that I actually wish they would go back and do special editions of, just to fix those moments, because it takes me out of the movie. The most glaring one to me, and again, I've mentioned this before, but the most glaring one to me is during the showdown between Emperor Palpatine, who turns into Sidious, and Mace Windu, when Anakin arrives to find them battling, that when he lands on that ship and he comes running in, the background on all that is just so clear. He is on a green screen stage, and it just takes me out of the movie every time that I watch it. So I bring all this up because I think that if I had to speculate based off of what I've seen so far, and what I kind of hope, is that I really hope, again, with The Force Awakens resetting the Star Wars fandom and getting everybody back on board and having faith in what Disney is doing, that maybe Rian Johnson is going to do the same thing as it relates to the prequel trilogy. There were a lot of photos from individuals taking pictures of the sequences that were filmed in Dubrovnik. Many people are pointing to the art book that shows some artwork, some concept artwork that looks an awful lot like the Dubrovnik sets. But the photos that we saw during these shots that were shown, there was some shots taking place on a boat, some green screen on a boat, but it's clear that there's going to be a scene that'll take place out on the water on whatever planet this is. The people that are on the boat seem to be upper class. They're all dressed very fancy. They are surrounded by very new, more high tech than what we saw in the Force Awakens. Really, if you didn't know any better, you would think that these were scenes that were being shot for the prequels. Perhaps something on Coruscant. They really have that aesthetic to them. Their outfits, the clothing, the costumes reminded me a lot of the Squid Lake sequence that took place in Revenge of the Sith, when there's that lengthy discussion between Anakin and Palpatine over Darth Plagueis. You know, when the ballet was going on. It looks like that. A lot of the set decoration taking place on land looks the same way as well. The Dubrovnik scenes involved some land speeders and a lot of people all dressed in black that were either heading out for a night on the town, or perhaps many people are speculating that it was a funeral. Some people were saying the sequences in Dubrovnik could have been Han Solo's funeral. I don't buy that. Because the talk was that perhaps this is Corellia, which would have been Han Solo's home planet, and that this would have been a funeral for him. But Han was still a smuggler when we got to Episode 7. Sure, he was a war hero, but everybody had forgotten about that by now. Nobody was looking at Han as a war hero anymore. You know, the Resistance was just as much a ragtag group of fighters as the Rebellion was in the original trilogy. You didn't have this large army that had decorated generals, if you will. They had the titles, but certainly that wasn't that wasn't the situation that they were in. You know, it wasn't like when we had the clone troopers. You know, the Republic, the Grand Army of the Republic, and even the equipment that they had and the troopers, and how it had a sense of sophistication to it in terms of an army. This was a ragtag group of individuals, and Han wasn't with Leia anymore. He was out on some freighter, carting around monsters and being chased by thugs, Guavian death gangs. So I don't see how there would have been this grandiose, posh, if you will, funeral for Han. It could be, and I would be down with, a funeral for everybody that was killed in the Hosnian system in Episode 7. That, to me, I can get behind. I like that idea. I like the idea that perhaps the sequence taking place, and look, it could be something completely different. We're all just speculating. But if it was a funeral with all these individuals dressed in black, it could have been a funeral, and it would have been justified to have been a funeral for those that were killed in the Hosnian system when the First Order took out the Republic. And actually, it would go and lend weight to what happened in Episode 7, because a lot of people were really disappointed that we didn't have time to get emotionally attached to what happened when the First Order fired Starkiller Base and destroyed those planets and those millions, if not billions, of people and the Republic at the same time. To my larger point, though, the speeders that are in the photographs taken from the production look like they were lifted directly out of Attack of the Clones. They have this prequel aesthetic to them. The set decoration and the outfits have a prequel aesthetic to them. Nothing that we saw when we saw the production photos of The Force Awakens or when we actually saw the movie really had any kind of prequel vibe. I'm excited that Rian Johnson could be bringing in a prequel feel, because it would stand to reason that there were areas in the galaxy that would still look and feel like the prequel era did, that maybe were never touched by the Clone Wars or the Empire in such a way to where it brought down, catastrophe. If they went to go visit, Naboo, I would imagine that Naboo would still look pretty decent. It would still look, not all that dissimilar than it did, somewhat 60 years earlier in the Phantom Menace. And I'm really, as a prequel fan, I'm excited over that. I like this idea of getting a good director on board to bring in a great story, fantastic acting into a world that has a look and feel closer to what the prequels did, which again, if that's Disney's intention, and I have no reason to believe it is or isn't, but if it is, pretty ingenious on their part to be able to do what The Force Awakens did for the original trilogy for the prequel trilogy and expand upon it and make it even better. All of this is to say, I'm also kind of frustrated that I've talked more about Episode 8 than I have Rogue One, and Rogue One comes out in less than a year, which is, just a little bit frustrating. And with that, I'm out of time. Thank you so much for checking out episode number 43 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. As always, subscribe on iTunes if you don't already. Drop a rating there. You can always email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. I will try to be more consistent with the next show for next week for episode 44. But again, thank you for hanging out here for episode number 43 of the podcast. And until I talk to you next time, may the Force be with you always.